The title of this episode is Jimmy Tiso and the Long Stick. This is being recorded October 4th, 2022. The date of occurrence was 1966, wintertime. It involved myself. I'm Jack Lynch. I was a Boy Scout at the time in Troop 17. My brother Dickie, who was a Boy Scout in Troop 17. Jimmy Tiso, who was a young, kind of short guy, a year or two younger than us. He was about the youngest Boy Scout in our troop, but he was kind of small and skinny, dark-haired, but he was one of the group. Eddie Grant was there, Sarah was there, Ferdinand Ritz was there, Donald Early was there, Albert LeMunyon was there, probably a couple others that I've forgotten about. There's a group of us, and the plan was for us to go up early on a Saturday and drive all the way up to Beech Mountain Boy Scout Camp, sort of up in the mountains there in New York. And the scout camp, of course, wasn't open in the wintertime like that. There was calf-deep snow up there, but there was a lean-to, very large lean-to, that a lot of the staff stayed in the summertime during camp. That lean-to was made available to us. All we had to do was hang a big tarp in the front of it, light some lanterns inside, and it would warm up a little bit, and we could all sleep on the floor in that lean-to. We ran around all day, trying out our big husky sled in the snow, building fires outside in the snow, getting used to that sort of thing. Did all of our cooking out there and snowball fights and all that. After it got dark and started to get cold, we all headed into the lean-to to batten down the hatch and see about getting some sleep. About that time, the bags were all rolled out. My dad was on one side of the lean-to. Ferdinand Ritz and Sarah were on the other side of the lean-to, and the rest of us kids were somewhere in between. We got ourselves in our bags. My dad was the first one to jump in his sleeping bag, lay down, close his eyes, and act like he was asleep. He wasn't. He was listening to everything, and he knew that they would cut up real good if they thought that he was asleep, but they wouldn't make a lot of noise because they wouldn't want him woken up to stop it. As soon as the lights were dimmed way down, that's about the time that Jimmy Tiso got the stick that he'd stashed away in that lean-to. This was a real long stick. It could reach from one side of the lean-to where my dad was sleeping, right next to Jimmy Tiso, all the way across to where Baba Sarah was sleeping. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, things finally calmed down. The talking slowed down, then pretty soon there wasn't any. Pretty soon you could hear people sleeping. That was about the time that Jimmy Tiso quietly got out of his bag, grabbed the stick, and it had a nice long arch to it. He grabbed the big end of that stick, and the small end at the end of the arch was lowered down to where Baba Sarah was, right against the other wall. He twitched Baba Sarah on the head and pulled the stick up. Sarah woke up a little bit, sort of looked around, laid back down. Jimmy Tiso waited a few more minutes, and he lowered the stick down and got Sarah on the other side of his head, just a little bit of a twitch with the end of that stick. Baba Sarah raised right up, looking around. Didn't see anything, laid back down. Jimmy Tiso bided his time. About 15 minutes later, Sarah's back asleep. This time Jimmy Tiso takes that stick and he sort of teased Sarah's shoulder a little bit. Pulled the stick up, and Sarah this time raised up, and his little sleeping partner next to him, Ferdinand Ritz, got punched in the shoulder. Ferdinand Ritz was asleep and it woke him up, and he said, "What are you doing that for? Why did you hit me?" And Sarah said, "You know why. And you do it again, I'm going to hit you even harder in the face." My dad was watching all that. He didn't laugh, he didn't say a word. And there lay Jimmy Tiso, holding onto his stick, but the stick's in the air out of sight, and he waited a few minutes. He lowered that stick down, and he tapped Ferdinand Ritz on the shoulder that was between him and Baba Sarah. Just gave it a little twitch, pulled the stick up. Ferdinand Ritz looked around, didn't see anything, laid back down again. Tiso waited a few minutes, lowered the stick down, and teased Ferdinand Ritz in the shoulder again and raised the stick up. This time Ferdinand Ritz came all unglued. He sat up and he didn't hit Sarah. He started screaming and yelling, "What are you doing that for? Why are you touching me that way? Why are you messing with me? I'm trying to sleep. You're blaming me, but you're the one that's been doing it all along, blah, blah, blah." And it just went on. He just had a big fit. It was wonderful. At that point, while all that was going on that other side of the lean-to, Jimmy Tiso took that stick and carefully put it back on the floor between him and the wall, laid down in his sleeping bag, and had a good sleep. And that was about the time my dad went to sleep. The next morning, Tiso said nothing. My dad said nothing. Ferdinand Ritz and Baba Sarah just looked at each other kind of with a little steam in their eyes, and just unhappy about what had gone on the night before, and they couldn't figure out why they did this to each other. That would have just died an early death, that whole story, except 10, 20 years later, something was said about that camp out up in the snow, and my dad launched that story about what he saw and what he knew and how Tiso had gotten those two older guys all mad at each other without hardly even trying. Up until about 5 years ago, you mentioned Jimmy Tiso to my dad, who was, late 80s, early 90s, and he would tell you that story about Jimmy Tiso. It was one of those things that made Boy Scouts really worthwhile.